What does a war look like when it never truly begins and never truly ends? When it stretches so long that a child is born, grows up, and has children of their own under the same sound of helicopters cutting the sky. I was 27 years old when the world decided my country would become the front line of a global idea. Back then, mornings smelled like dust, bread, and diesel fuel. I lived in a modest neighborhood on the edge of Kabul, where concrete homes leaned into each other like tired old men sharing secrets. I worked as a school teacher, teaching basic English to children who still believed that learning was a shield, that words could protect them from bullets. We had already lived through decades of conflict: Soviet tanks, civil war, the Taliban. War was not new to us. It was like an old disease that never fully leaves the body. But in 2001, something felt different, heavier, louder, like the sky itself had joined the fighting. On the radio, we heard words that sounded foreign even when translated: terror, axis of evil, global war. To us, terror was not a strategy, it was a daily sensation. It was the knock on the door at night. It was the road you avoided because someone said a bomb had been planted there. It was the silence after an explosion, when your ears rang and your mind asked the same question every time: who didn't make it? Still, I believed the storm would pass. Wars always ended, didn't they? The first American planes came like metal birds, roaring so loudly they shook dishes off shelves. The Taliban fell quickly, or so it seemed. Their flags vanished from buildings. Men shaved their beards. Music returned to the markets, timid at first, like a forbidden lover sneaking back into town. Foreign soldiers arrived with promises. They spoke of rebuilding, democracy, security. They handed out bottled water and candy to children. Some smiled, some looked terrified, barely older than my students. At first, many of us welcomed them. Schools reopened, roads were paved. I received new textbooks, printed in glossy colors I had never seen before. My students learned new words: future, choice, rights. But slowly, subtly, the ground shifted beneath our feet. Night raids began. Men were taken away because their name resembled another name, or because a neighbor whispered something into the wrong ear. Drones appeared in the sky, invisible but always present, like an unblinking god. Weddings were hit. Funerals were mistaken for meetings. Apologies followed explosions, but apologies do not bring back mothers. We began to understand the truth. This war was not being fought for us, but through us. The insurgency returned like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Bombings became common. Checkpoints multiplied. Every journey was a calculation of risk. You memorized safe streets the way others memorized phone numbers. Children learned the difference between outgoing and incoming fire before they learned long division. I lost my brother in 2008. He was not a fighter. He drove a taxi. One morning, he picked up two men who seemed nervous. 10 minutes later, his car disappeared in a fireball at a checkpoint. They called it collateral damage. I called it the day my mother's hair turned completely white. The insurgency adapted. So did we. We learned to live between explosions. We celebrated weddings quickly, without music loud enough to attract attention. We buried our dead faster. Grief became efficient. Meanwhile, presidents changed in distant capitals. Strategies were announced. Troop surges came and went. Each time we were told this would be the turning point. Each time, the violence found a new way to survive. The war was no longer an event, it was an environment. In August 2021, I stood on my roof and listened to something I had not heard in 20 years. Silence. No helicopters, no drones, no explosions. Just the wind and the distant cries of people running. The Taliban had returned, not through battle, but through absence. The foreign armies were leaving, and the government collapsed like a house built on sand. Soldiers vanished, officials fled, checkpoints were abandoned overnight. At the airport, chaos erupted. I watched videos on a neighbor's phone, people clinging to airplanes, choosing death over the unknown. It felt unreal, like watching the ending of a movie I had been trapped inside for 2 decades. All those years, all those lives, and in the end, the war simply stopped walking forward and turned back the way it came. That night, I sat with my son, who was now the same age I had been when the war began. He asked me a question I could not answer. "Father, was it all for nothing?" Now I am older. My beard is gray. My classroom is closed again. The textbooks I once treasured sit in boxes, their pages already yellowing with irrelevance. The war on terror lasted 20 years, but for people like me, it had no clear beginning and no clean end. It arrived as a promise and left as a question mark. What did the world learn? That bombs can remove regimes, but not beliefs. That fear is a poor architect for peace. That when wars are fought in the name of security, it is often ordinary people who become the battlefield. And what did I learn? That survival is not victory. That hope is fragile but stubborn. And that history is not just written by generals and presidents, but by teachers, taxi drivers, mothers, and children who carry its weight long after the headlines move on. Some nights, when the sky is quiet, I almost miss the noise, not because I loved it, but because silence reminds me how much was lost beneath it. 20 years of war taught me this. A war against terror cannot be won by creating more terror, and a generation raised under bombs will always hear echoes, even when the world finally decides to listen.